And here he is, D Gunn. What do you say, D? Looking good.
Ant, how you doing, my brother?
Good, man. It's good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you, man. It's been a while.
I know. You look fantastic.
I've lost like 25 pounds over the last 7 months, and I feel a lot better, a lot more active, lighter. I feel like my boxing weight is back, man.
Yeah, man. Look at you. I love it, man. That's fantastic. God bless you. You got those grandbabies that keep you busy.
4 grandkids, man, and it's like being a goalie in a hockey game, brother. You're trying to keep them in play. That's all you're trying to do, man. And they're ages from 1 to 8 years old, man. And I'm telling you what, man, you got to break out the biofreeze every now and then, and a little Bengay, and they let you know you're not that youthful individual that you used to be, but you still got a little pep in your step. Man, they work you, brother. They work you.
You got to keep them out of the penalty box. That's all.
Ooh, man.
That's great. Let's start. And listen, you are fantastic. When it comes to the Eagles, like I just want to hear what you have to say. And you're very close to that franchise. You're very close to the organization. Before we get into the big discussion, which is Howie and the draft, what did Fletcher Cox mean to this franchise? We were kind of looking at it. Is he a top 10 Eagle over the last 20 years?
Ooh, wow. First of all, he was the rock of stability within that defensive line. When he was on his game, there was nobody better in the National Football League except maybe Aaron Donald, and that's a push, in terms of controlling his area at the line of scrimmage, to allow other people to do certain things that defensive coordinators asked them to do. A lot of what Fletcher did, it didn't show up in the stat box. He was asked to eat up space.
Yep.
And man, could he eat up space? When he was double teamed. One thing I loved about Fletcher is when he was double teamed, you didn't see a lot of push back. You saw him holding his ground and eating up space so a linebacker or safety could shoot through a gap to make a play. And the Eagles recognized that. He didn't just stay here for 12 years by accident. He was a viable cog in that defensive scheme, no question about it. But as you get a little bit older, obviously, your skill set declines a little bit. And that's not a knock against Fletcher. That's just the laws of averages in the National Football League. But if he had said he wanted to play this year, the Eagles would have welcomed him with open arms to play again this year because he's just that good. Is he a top 10 all-time Eagle?
Well,
man,
that's 20 years.
Last 20 years. Wow. Let's see. Man,
it's interesting, right? Because we were kind of going through it. You got the early guys with, obviously Donovan and B. West, right? And Dawkins. And so
Jason Peters.
Right.
Jason Kelsey.
Yeah.
Lane Johnson. T.O. was here briefly.
Yeah.
Can you include T.O. Runyon?
Yes.
Can you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
I mean, BG, and another maybe Brandon Graham has been a mainstay. I mean, he's got to be a top 10 last 20 years.
It's funny, and I joke with Brandon about this all the time. Brandon's my guy, so I joke with him a lot about this. His claim to fame. Now, think about this. How many athletes have come through this city, Anthony, and you're a Philadelphia native? His claim to fame in Philadelphia was one defining moment in that Super Bowl. Because up until then, a lot of people were indifferent about Brandon. He didn't live up to the hype. His first few years in the league, he couldn't stay healthy.
Yeah, the Earl
then
Thomas
he didn't live up to the hype. Then all of a sudden, he makes the one shining moment, as they like to use in the NCAA tournament, the one shining moment in that Super Bowl against the evil empire that's the Patriots. All of a sudden, he's the Pied Piper of Philadelphia. Can you argue that Brandon Graham is a top 10 player in Philadelphia in the last 20 years? That's a great debate, Anthony, because there's so many different directions you can go in with these players. And I'm on the fence with Fletcher. I can't say no, I can't say yes, because I'd have to sit here and add up all the players, as you guys are doing.
Yeah.
Add up all the players we're comparing them to.
Yeah.
It's funny. Do you include Donovan in that mix?
Yeah, I know. Listen, he's kind of Nick Foles. I mean, when you think about it, that he's got to be a part of the conversation because he brings your only Super Bowl. He's incandescent in the game. He has the 21-2 season, 27-2. He has the this following year he comes in relief again.
Right, right,
So
right.
you can make his argument as well.
I have to put an asterisk next to Foles' name just because
Yeah,
his
that's fair.
window of opportunity was small. When you
Yep.
ask me that question, I'm looking at the overall body of work of a player who was here in Philadelphia. So I can't include Nick Foles in that. Although Nick Foles could run for mayor of Philadelphia and possibly win, because of what he did for this organization. And I love Nick Foles, don't get me wrong. But I've got to look at the overall body of what a player contributed to this organization. So I have to put an asterisk next to Nick's name. But when it comes to some of the other players we've talked about, definitely, Jason Kelsey, Jason Peters, my goodness, Donovan's in there, so I'm going to say I have to put Fletcher Cox in there. The
Yeah.
more I think about it, I'm going to have to put Fletch in there.
Yeah, it's a fun conversation
Yes.
of the top 10, last 20. Let's get to the big story and talking about the draft. And it's 9:30, and this portion of the program is brought to you by Rite Aid. Check out your local Rite Aid neighborhood store for all of your goods that you need. So I was just looking at the Eagles since Howie takes back over in 2016.
Yep.
The Eagles are 7th in wins in the NFL over that period of time. Kansas City, of course, has the most, 97-34, which is astounding. Dallas is second at 82-49. And then you got the Saints at 81, Green Bay, New England, 79 apiece, Seattle 77, and the Eagles 76-54-1. They have made the playoffs 6 of the 8 times since Howie's returned. 2 Super Bowls, 1 Super Bowl victory. I mean, he's still a polarizing guy. And I look at it and I say, my answer is yes, you should have faith in Howie Roseman.
One thing we can say about Howie Anthony is he will not sit still in terms of always looking to make this roster better, always looking to plug a gap. You look at what they did in 2022 when the run game was going south. He goes out and gets, Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph to plug the gaps there. You look at the pieces they brought in, last year. You look at the pieces they brought in the year they won the Super Bowl. Howie will not sit still. And this roster, as we look at it right now, is far from being complete right now. And I know a lot of people are hot and cold about Howie. I understand it. But give Howie credit for making strategic moves, for knowing how to work the cap. You look at all the offseason moves he's made just this year. There's still 30+ million cap space that he can work with, okay? So I have to give Howie credit. And I've known Howie a long time. And Howie and I have had some great discussions. We've had some differences of opinions, but we've had some great discussions, a lot of mutual respect there. I have a lot of respect for Howie because to me, he is one of the top 2 or 3 GMs in the National Football League. There's no question about that.
See, what I always look at it, and I'll judge it in this sense. Are you in contention? In this league, because of injuries, right, and everything, you just got to be in contention. That's what my wish every year is. Can you build something that sustains? Now, clearly, some positions have been better than others, right? Like their O-line has been terrific, right?
Yes.
Like, that's been a mainstay. But the role of a GM is not just draft. It's like, all right, we could use some draft capital here. We have obviously cap that you mentioned, and the free agent piece of it, right? Like the guy on the street, like the injured guy that you stash or that you pick up in October, like all that goes into the big picture.
I think one of the biggest pluses for Howie, and I had him on a show a couple of years ago back in May, and he brought this to light. And he said, the one thing I had to learn as I reemerged as a GM was learning to listen to other people better. And that included his grandfather. And everybody kept asking me, why are you not drafting more of these guys out of this SEC conference? So he started to listen to more people in terms of how to go about draft, what to attack in terms of free agency, so on and so forth. And I give him kudos because, Anthony, in anything we do in life, when you get to a certain level, and I'm not saying this about Howie, I'm just saying this in a broad sense. A lot of times when you get to a certain plateau, you think you're the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah.
And what happens is, and I've always subscribed to this, when you think you're the smartest person in a room, you're in the wrong room. See, you never stop learning. I don't care what you do in life, what level
I'm
you
with
get
you.
to. You never stop learning. And I love this about Howie. He learned to listen, and it showed in terms of what he's done over the last couple of years in terms of attacking free agency. Look at how they've drafted the last several years. Now they're just entrenched in SEC players. Okay, so that's one of the significant things that keeps Howie at the top of the pecking order with GMs.
Yeah, and you have to continue to reinvent yourself, right? Like,
Yes,
at
yes,
some point, you mix in Ohio State players, right, and Michigan
yes,
players, and
yes,
I'm
yes.
using that as just a fun analogy. But you have to constantly, the game is constantly changing, right? So
Yes.
all of a sudden, linebacker matters, right? Like all of a
Absolutely,
sudden,
absolutely.
like you look at San Francisco and Baltimore and Kansas City to some extent.
Yep.
They have fullbacks. They deploy fullbacks, right? Like
Yep.
San Fran and Baltimore. All of a sudden, the fullback means it helps you win. And that means you need linebackers to stop the run game. And you need safeties that can play up in the box as well as cover. So the game constantly is evolving.
Absolutely. It's amazing how, just 10 years ago, how we had running backs on such a high pedestal. All of a sudden, the running back became a forgotten entity, especially in terms of being paid in the National Football League. And then all of a sudden, the running back's now reemerging again in the National Football League. It seems like every 2 or 3 years, it shifts in terms of what is a priority in terms of making yourself better in the NFL. If you look at the 4 teams that went to the Final Four in the NFL, linebacking play was significant in terms of their success this year in the National
Especially
Football
Kansas
League.
City.
Oh, there's no question about it. Baltimore, Kansas City, San Francisco, there's no question about it. The linebacking play has become a rock of Gibraltar, maybe even more so than certain spots on the defensive line in the National Football League.
Totally. It's interesting because when we look at this draft, and I'll segue into it, I would really like to address the second. I want either a corner or an edge rusher. It looks like those are the 2 spots. I'd like to trade up. I'd like to get you have 2 seconds, you have 2 fifths. I think, and I understand the importance of the O-line. And if you got a tackle that can come in at guard, I think you're good. But I want to address defense.
There's no question about it. I don't think this defense is anywhere close to being a finished product, Anthony.
Yeah.
And I will tell you this from what I know about talking to people on the inside. The first couple of picks that they draft this year, they want players that can come in and play now. They don't want project players. They have a lot of room. There's a lot of jobs wanted for that defense. When you lose, you're stabilizing force to retirement at Fletcher Cox. When you lose your best edge rusher in a Hassan Reddick, you have gaping holes to fill in that defense. I don't think there's any position on this defense except maybe Darius Slay and CJ GJ that are just set right now for this team. Well, Avonte Maddox coming back will be your slot corner. I love Avonte Maddox. His biggest problem is he can't stay healthy. But I think outside of that, I think it's wide open in terms of what this defense is going to look like in a Vic Fangio type defense. And so I agree with you. I think they have to get an edge rusher and they have to get another corner. Although I do believe, and I've said this on a number of platforms, the kids they have in-house, like the Keely Ringos, the Eli Ricks, and when Sidney Brown is healthy.
Ringo.
I do too. I love his aggressiveness. You have to let these kids play. Go back to 2022. Look at what Kansas City did. They played with a bunch of kids on the back end of that defense, and people are like, what in the world are you doing? Okay? The first part of that season in 2022, those kids took a beating. It was like watching the Keystone Cops. They didn't know where they're supposed to be. All of a sudden, by late November, early December, it began to gel. Now, granted, you got a future Hall of Famer and Patrick Mahomes running the show. Not every team has that, but you have to develop from within. You can't keep picking up free agent, my brother. You have to, and they have the talent pool. I believe they have the talent pool, especially on the back end of that secondary, to let some of these kids develop.
You're so. I lived it with Spags, so
Yes.
I remember every day, and he loved those kids because listen, they're going to get it. They're going to get it. Yep. And by the end of that year, they got it. And this year, they were, another
lights
defense
out. Yeah.
won the Super Bowl for him. I think you're spot on. Hey, last thing, and I'm curious.
Yeah.
Sirianni, like, where are you at with Sirianni? It's funny because he comes in and, unbridled success from the beginning, and then the collapse of last year. Where are you at with Nick?
I'm not surprised that he's back in 2024. I think he's earned that right. When you think about it, Anthony, how many coaches in the National Football League have gone to the playoffs every year of their tenure, in their early tenure in the National Football League, and go to a Super Bowl your second year? Just doesn't happen. I understand a lot of people were irate with him the way it fell off last year. I get that. But Howie and Jeffrey were not going to make a coaching change, because you have to be careful what you ask for. You think the grass is greener on the other side. You can end up with another Adam Gase or somebody like that out there instead of what you already have in-house. Nick is loved by these players. These players respect Nick Sirianni. Nick, as I broke that story back in January about Nick needs to control his emotions a little bit more, I think that was a detriment down the stretch in terms of Big Dom not being, and I say this jokingly because Big Dom is one of my guys. I love him to death. I've never heard of a security guard having, as much impact on the sideline.
He does.
Like
people don't realize
Big
Dom is, we go way back. So
yes.
He's more than just security guard. He's a big part of that.
There's no question about it. And he was that controlling factors. Now, a lot of people blew that out of proportion in terms of, what do you mean a security guard has to control the head coach? Every football team, college or pros, has somebody who helps rein them in when they get a little too animated, a little too much. Okay. But as you heard players, and as you heard even Sirianni indirectly say, he's got to do a better job of controlling those emotions at strategic points of a game. I'm a Nick Sirianni fan, to be honest with you. And I think Nick knows it. The organization knows it. 2024 is a pivotal year in terms of his tenure in the National Football League. I think this team right now, Anthony, as it's assembled, is a playoff caliber team. I'm not saying it's a Super Bowl team, way too early. But you got some teams up and coming that are knocking at your door, like the Detroits, the Green Bays. We already know what San Francisco's are and teams like that. But this team's talent pool right now is good enough to get him to the playoffs again. But going year 4 into your tenure may not be good enough to keep a job. You've got to do something significant. Your offense right now is set. I don't care if they don't add another piece to this offense. This offense should accidentally score 25, 28 points a game. There's no question about it. I love his passion. I love his ability to relate to players. The players respect the fact that they can talk to him. Plus, he can also get on them when he has to. Now he just has to go out, do his job, and take it to that next level.
Yep, I'm with him, my brother. And he's got 2 good coordinators. D. Gunn, good to see you, pal. God
Likewise,
bless those
brother.
grandkids.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me on.
Look forward to that again. All right, you look great. Problem. Take care of yourself, buddy.